Hello everyone, as always, I'll be your host tonight, Mr. Dead Sleep. I'll be sharing 4 scary stories from a few amazing authors that I found on NoSleep Reddit. As always, likes and subscribes are appreciated, and if you want to comment, please do. I'd love to hear what you have to say. But right now, just sit back, lay back, whatever is most comfortable for you, and enjoy. Our first story of the night is titled Of Mindfulness and Madness. Here we go. His first thought was of moonlight, and later of an eye so white it blocked out the sun. Or maybe it was the sun, a cold, harsh sun that had no warmth and left a tingling feeling on his skin. The static hum of bees filled his ears, but no, not bees, something softer than that, with more rhythm and melodies. Music, yes, that's what it was. Although he doubted if he ever knew what music was. The word felt familiar in his brain, but when he attempted to place it on his dry, swollen tongue, all he could muster was a whimper. He closed his eyes against the sun, or whatever it was. Light, something whispered behind his eyes. You know this. His eyes flew open. He did know this. His eyes lulled about in his skull. He tried to focus on something, anything, but the light gnawed at his pupils, and tears rolled down his cheeks. He was laying on his back, laying on something hard. This he could feel. The cold seeped in through his skin, scratching his bones, licking at his nerves. He wanted more than anything for it to go away, but still it came, slow and methodical. He tried to lift up his arm, needing the light to be blocked out so he could make sense of the ideas skipping around inside his skull. But something tugged back. He felt the pressure of it wrapped around his wrist. It dug deeper into his skin the harder he pulled. His neck gave an awful creak as he lifted his head off the icy floor. His eyes shivered in relief without the light on them. Seconds ticked by in his brain as they adjusted to the changed lighting. It wasn't a floor he was laying on, no, not at all. It was a table, a metal one. A slab, the voice behind his eyelid screeched. Don't sugarcoat it, Doc. You're polished and ready for the morgue. His skin glowed white and bare, save a light blue sheet covering his lower body. Thick leather straps secured his extremities to the table, and he glimpsed raw skin peering out from underneath the restraints. Shouldn't have tugged so hard, the voice said, giggling over the melodic sounds of Frank Sinatra that floated through the room. A loud clanking noise sounded behind the doctor, and his breath whistled as he sharply drew in. Fear dripped from him like sweat. It was on his tongue, in his hair, pooled by his feet. His eyes grew wide as a second clanking sound chimed in, this time closer, and was followed by a soft swishing. A door, the voice jeered. Here they come, Doc, ready to wheel you away. Any guesses on where you're headed? He wanted the maniacal laughter to go away, wanted to concentrate on the noise coming from behind. With shut eyelids, he swiveled his head slowly around, not daring to look at the potential horrors that were slinking in through unseen doors. He lowered his breathing. His voice raw, husky, and barely audible over the music. He peeked through his eyelids, heart pounding in relief when he realized there was nothing next to him. From his position, he could vaguely see a pair of metal doors in the corner of his eye. Blue light spilled from them, casting the objects in the room with an almost alien-like glow. A gloved hand reached out from just beyond his field of vision, grasping his head firmly and shoving it back down onto the table. He hit with a thud, his teeth chattering in retaliation to such an aggressive action. The fingers roamed over his chest, pressing down on his sternum. He noticed another gleaming white hand, identical to the first, reaching past him towards something he hadn't noticed before. The shiny metal trolley squatted directly to his left, lined with the bright metal tools of various shape, size, and sharpness. There's your fate, don't you see? The voice shrunk to a whisper. In one motion, the hands came to his throat, squeezing as they struggled with something a few inches to the right of his exposed neck. dark spots blinked in and out of the doctor's vision. His throat was on fire. The hands loosened before the blackness made a full appearance, but the comfort was small and shortly lived. Another piece of thick leather soon took their place, putting pressure on him once again. He felt the hands fumble on the other side of him, which he soon understood to be them latching the restraint into place. His breath became shallow and ragged now. He struggled to pull breath into his lungs, which only caused him to panic further. He was almost completely immobile. The only movement coming from him was the quick darting of his eyes and the shaking of his body. A man stepped out from behind him, his hair disheveled and falling in clumps around his face. His eyes were gray and twinkling. He was tall and fit. His hips surpassed the height of the table, and he loomed over the doctor. His mouth was covered by a paper mask, like those used in surgery. A bell sounded in his head. So, the wheels do work in this funny little head of yours. It was his last thought that terrified him most. A surgery mask. But the man wasn't a doctor. He was dressed in casual clothing, like something someone would wear out to the shops. He tried to open his mouth, tried to ask where he was, what was happening, why was he strapped down, but his tongue was glued to the roof of his mouth. No need to speak, doctor. This is strictly business. You don't remember me. Your eyes tell me that, and that's okay, for now. I hope you remember him, though. The man pulled something out of the back pocket of his jeans. The doctor's eyes focused on it. It was a photo, and when his eyes fell on the face that was front and center of the snapshot, his heart stopped. Tears began to flow, faster and with more force than before. The masked man's eyes crinkled. He was smiling. He was basking in the poor wretch on the table's tears. That's right, so you do remember Victor. The kid you claimed was crazy and needed to be institutionalized because he walked in on you with a woman, one you weren't married to. He's figured you out, finally. Please welcome Doc to the left stage for his final bow. They locked him up, all because you were a trusted source. Electroshock therapy, days of being alone in a locked room with no light, and then the lobotomy. The man's eyes narrowed, stony and menacing. I'm not going to waste time. They broke Victor. He was only 13. He lost a lifetime of years, and I think it's past time someone took responsibility. In one swoop, he grabbed the electric saw off the table, turned it on, and lowered it towards the doctor's polished head. He saw the cord trailing behind the machine, drifting almost fairy-like in the air. The saw connected with flesh, and soon after, bone. Justice at last! I'll see you on the other side, Doc. Victor's voice, one that had been with the doctor since the moment he heard about the tragic failure of the poor kid's operation, fell silent at last. The man laying on the table, fragments of bone and specks of blood showering his face and body, felt eerily calm. Death was catching up to him, and justice for Victor, the boy he betrayed for his own gain, would be served. The doctor closed his eyes, at peace with his inevitable horrific fate, and smiled. Then he opened his mouth one last time and screamed. Okay, moving right along, let's get into our next story of the night. This one is just called, I've Been Locked in My Bathroom for 14 Hours. Here we go. I was confused and a little disappointed when Elizabeth suddenly left the shower. She just walked out on me after we had only been in there for about 5 minutes. She didn't say anything. She didn't dry off. She just left. I called after my girlfriend, but she didn't respond. She opened the bathroom door and walked out, water dripping onto the carpet. I noticed not to go after her. I just continued on with my shower. After roughly 5 minutes, I was done. Elizabeth hadn't come back. I dried off and got dressed. Still, no sign of my girlfriend. I thought her actions were weird since Elizabeth was always so open with me. She had never done anything like this before. I decided that the best course of action was to go out and check on her and make sure she was okay. I left the bathroom and followed the trail of wet footprints she had left on the floor. She had apparently walked straight out of the bedroom and into the living room. The trail zigzagged for a bit until it reached the cabinet on the far right side of the room. Where the footprints ended was a massive, damp blob. It looked as if she had sat down on the floor and then vanished into the air. Confused, I looked around on the floor to see any indication of where she had gone. It was a very odd sight. My girlfriend seemed to have completely disappeared. Finally, after puzzling for a while, I saw a few drops under the cabinet itself, as if she carefully climbed under it without touching the floor. Suddenly, I bent down and looked under the cabinet, and I saw a terrifying sight. One that I'll never be able to forget. Elizabeth's naked body was shoved between the cabinet and the wall. Her face was pointing in my direction, and I could see that her eyes were wide open, and her mouth was wide, as if she was trying to scream but no sound was coming out. She was still dripping with water. I frantically stood up and pulled the cabinet back from the wall, and her body fell onto the carpet, and that's when I knew for sure that she was dead. There were bloody gouges all over her back and head. The gouges didn't seem like they were made by a human. They definitely weren't made with a knife or any other weapon. The cuts looked like they were made with claws. Terrified, I backed up and looked for my phone. I couldn't see it anywhere. I began desperately turning the living room open, looking for it. My girlfriend was dead, no doubt about that. But I wasn't thinking straight, and I thought I could call an ambulance for help. The phone, however, was nowhere in sight. After I'd been searching for a few minutes, I heard a noise come from the guest room. I stopped cold in my tracks. I heard it again. It sounded like something was being dragged across the floor. I carefully made my way toward the door to the guest room. I decided to peek around the frame to check what was inside. What I saw inside terrified me to my very core. There was something in the room. What it was is impossible to describe. All I know is that it wasn't human. Its back was turned to me, but I could tell that it wasn't human. It was breathing, but beyond that, it's as if the sight was too much for my human brain. I cannot remember what I saw, yet I know exactly what it looked like, down to the smallest detail. Maybe I sound insane. Maybe I am insane. I just don't know anymore. As soon as I saw it, my heart seemingly stopped as my mind felt like it was melting. I just stood in place, watching the thing pulse. After what felt like hours, I was finally snapped out of my trance when the creature, whatever it was, started moving again. It slowly began to turn its head in my direction. I knew I had to get away from this thing. Still, in a state of shock, I backed away. I didn't know where to go. The guest room was parallel to our front door, and we live on the 6th floor of our apartment complex, so I can't escape through a window. The only place I could think to go was back to the bathroom. I booked it back to the bedroom, and then to the bathroom. I ran faster than I ever have, fueled by pure adrenaline. As soon as I made it inside, closed and locked the door, I collapsed on the cold tile. The house was silent. Now that I was still, the loss of Elizabeth hit me like a freight train. We'd been together for almost 3 years by now. We had seen and done so much together. Tears welled up in my eyes. Then I remembered the creature in my house. I was trapped in my own house. I didn't know what to do. I was in complete despair. After about 10 minutes, I started hearing the dragging sounds again. I would hear a few of the noises consecutively. Then there would be a pause, and about 15 seconds later, the cycle would repeat itself. The last time I heard a dragging sound, it was accompanied by another sound. It took me a while to realize that the sound was a knock. The creature was knocking at my door. It knew I was here. I slowly backed away into the corner of the bathroom counter. I grabbed a razor and held it in front of me as a weapon, though I knew it wouldn't do much good. After an agonizing minute or so of silence, the creature spoke to me. My blood ran cold when I realized that it was using Elizabeth's voice. "Jason, why'd you lock the door?" the monster asked. "I just went out to check if I left the oven on." As crazy as it sounds, I almost stood up and opened the door. I really wanted the voice to truly be Elizabeth's. I was suffering the trauma of what I'd seen, but I remembered all too clearly the dead body of my girlfriend. She was dead, and if I let the creature in, I would be too. So I didn't respond. I just sat there, razor in hand, waiting in silence. The creature continued to speak in Elizabeth's voice after that. The voice would plead with me, saying it was worried. It said that it loved me. It said that it wanted to marry me. I just tried to ignore it, tears streaming down my face. About an hour after the voice started, it began knocking as well. I covered my ears and curled up into a ball, praying to whatever God was out there to make it stop. But it never did. It just kept going. It's been 14 hours since then. I found my phone in a laundry basket, which is how I'm writing this now, in the hopes that someone will come and save me. I've tried calling 911, but I haven't gotten a response. I've tried contacting friends and family. That hasn't worked either. It's almost as if this monster had closed me off from the world, except for a very small window. That's why I'm sharing my story here, with the small hope that someone will read this and rescue me. I know it isn't likely, but it's all I have. But the worst thing about all of this is that over the last few hours, I've been having this bizarre urge to leave. To just get up and walk straight out to the creature. I can't take this for much longer. Please, if there's anyone out there, send help soon. Okay, that was our second creepy story of the night. Let's get into our third right now. This one is titled, "In Case I Don't Return." Here we go. I don't believe in paranormal stuff, at all. Whenever someone says they've seen a ghost, I assume that they're either lying or not accounting for natural phenomena that can explain it away. Same with any kind of monsters or aliens or anything like that. To say I'm a skeptic would be to undersell it. If I can't see it with my own eyes, it can't be real. That all changed 3 weeks ago. About 20 minutes from my house is a vast green valley nestled between the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. The grass comes up to your hips and moves like ocean waves in the breeze. A tiny little river cuts through the valley, and you can hear it rushing all around you. It's tranquil and my happy place. When I need to recharge my batteries, I load up the car and head out for the valley. 3 weeks ago, things got really stressed in my life. My company had allowed us to work from home during the pandemic and promised we could work from home permanently, but then, without warning, changed course. They required us to come in. My parents are a health risk, and my dad, for whatever reason, had decided not to get the vaccine. It's been a sore spot with us for a while now. Coming back into the office and navigating the space after a year off was not an easy transition. Everyone is awkward. Everyone is afraid someone will get sick. Half the people wear a mask, half don't. You feel judged by some if you have yours on. It's a nightmare. My bosses seem to have stored their rage and bullshit for a year and have been unreasonably tough on us. I've walked into the bathroom to hear more than one person breaking down. It's like they feel a need to reestablish order now that we're back in person. They know we can't just shut off our cameras during a Zoom call anymore, and they want to remind us of their power. It's been a mess. 3 weeks ago, Friday was a rough one. I spent the entire day putting out fires at work that I did not start. My boss laid into me about professionalism. I had dared to wear black sneakers, and I was just done with everyone. I usually don't do evening hikes, but I was nearing my breaking point. I seemed to have misjudged the time because the sun was already starting to set when I got there. Thankfully, I'd been there enough that I would be able to make my way around with no problem. I'd just make this a short walk and be done with it. If I still needed to chill out after my walk, I had wine at home. I parked my car in the lot. I was, not surprisingly, all alone, and headed out into the valley. My plan was to walk through the central valley, down to the river, and back. By that time, it should be dark, and I'll head out. I grabbed a small flashlight I kept in my car and headed out. The first leg of the hike was uneventful. Walking near the river, I heard the sound of hundreds of bees pollinating flowers. If you've never heard hundreds of bees in the wild, it's mesmerizing and incredible. It's a natural white noise machine. By the time I got to the river, it was pitch black already. I found a nice, dry spot, laid down on the ground, and stared up at the stars. There isn't a ton of light pollution out there, and you can see so many stars. I just stared in wonder and allowed myself to feel cosmically small. After about 10 minutes of stargazing, I turned on my flashlight and headed back towards my car. Everything was fine, but when I got near the center of the field, my flashlight started to flicker. I hit it against my hand, but it didn't do anything. The flashlight went dead when I was standing in the middle of the grass valley. Like I said earlier, I know the way back, but I wasn't thrilled with doing it in the dark. I yelled an expletive, the loudest I've ever screamed, and heard it echo back to me as it bounced off the foothills. I sighed and kept going. It was then when I decided I was going to need that wine after all. When I was about 10 feet from the middle of the field, I noticed the temperature started to warm. On top of that, there was a buzzy feeling in the air, kind of like static electricity, and it was all around me. Then, all the noise in the valley stopped. All I could hear was my heartbeat. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't budge. Not for the lack of trying. I could feel my muscles attempting to move my body forward, but it was like I was fighting against hurricane winds. Something just stopped me from moving. Then, I was surrounded by blue light. My heart raced, but I couldn't do anything. I couldn't crane my neck up to see what the hell was shooting this light at me. I couldn't scream or say a word. I suddenly felt pressure on my neck, and I blacked out. I don't remember anything after that. It's just gone from my memory. The neurons that store the encounter are burned out. My synapses can't pull anything from them. It was like I died, only I wasn't dead. I was a Schrodinger's hiker. The next I do remember was hearing the rushing of the river. I opened my eyes and saw that I'd somehow ended up back at the water's edge. I had no clue how that happened or why. My head hurt. I had incredible pressure in my sinuses and my vision was a little blurry at first. When it came back to normal, I glanced down at my watch and gasped. It was 3:15 in the morning. I stood on weirdly unstable legs and felt a chill go through my body. What the hell happened? I walked as fast as I could through the grass valley and found my car where I had left it. It must have rained at some point because it was wet. I have no recollection of rain or even clouds earlier in the day. A quick glance at my phone showed me the nearby skies were clear and a 0% change or precipitation. What the hell was going on? When I finally got home 20 minutes later, I could feel my body giving way to exhaustion. I dragged myself into the house and crashed on the bed. I didn't even take off my shoes. I slept until noon. When I woke up, I was in a haze. The headache was gone and my sinuses had cleared up, but I still felt odd. I spent the better part of my day in bed, trying to recall what had happened. I was hoping maybe I could remember some of that missing time, but nothing came to me. I was just gone for some time and no one knew what had happened. It was a mystery that would never be solved. I tried putting it behind me, but it just kept popping up in my thoughts. I felt like I would need to go back to the grass valley to see if there was any proof of anything. Maybe I missed something in the dark. I wasn't sure, but I was going to find out. The next day, I got back in my car and made the drive to the grass valley. When I got to the valley, I parked my car and headed out toward the middle of the field. That was the last place I remember being before I lost time. If there was anything to help me, I thought it might be that place. Before I saw the area, I smelled it. The air was heavy with ozone, so much so I started coughing. When I finally got to the spot, I was greeted with something very unsettling. The grass where the blue light had hit me was gone. Not ripped up or cut, but just missing. It was as if they had never been planted there at all. I leaned down to touch the soil and was shocked to find it hard and compacted down. It was so dense, I had to break out my keys and scratch into it before a chunk of it came loose. The ground underneath seemed normal enough, but the whole place had an odd vibe. It was about then that my sinuses started hurting again. Everything was in bloom, and I've had allergic reactions to things in the past, but this seemed different. I could almost localize the pain in my head to a specific spot. Most of my headaches tend to radiate all over my skull, but this was super specific. I didn't want to leave without stopping by the river, but this pain was killing me. I doubled over in pain and actually threw up on an anthill. In hindsight, I felt terrible for them, but at the moment I thought my skull was going to split open. I stood up and made my way to the river. I assumed running some cold water over my head might help with the pain. When I got to the spot where I woke up the night before, I dunked my head into the water. It must have helped because the throbbing slowed. I looked around the riverbank for about a half hour to see if I could find anything, but there was nothing. It seemed my trip was in vain, but something odd happened as I walked back out. As soon as I passed the missing grass spot, my head started to throb again. As soon as I was past it, it stopped. It seemed that somehow my head and that patch of burnt grass were connected. After that, I decided to leave. I left, not understanding anything more than I did when I arrived, except that a patch of the ground caused blistering sinus headaches. I didn't even know what to do with that information other than to avoid that spot in the future. That night I had a drink, or two, and laid around in my bed watching Netflix until about 11. I tried to drive the incident out of my head, but I couldn't let it go. It kept popping back up in my thoughts, and no amount of alcohol and cheesy holiday movies would drive it away. I eventually shut my brain up enough to lay down and head to sleep. That's when things got weird. I don't exactly remember what time it was, but all of a sudden I heard the calm, robotic voice of my alarm system say, "Movement at the front door." It snapped me from my slumber. I reached for my phone and checked the app. I saw my front porch on the screen, only there was nothing there, just bugs buzzing around the now glowing porch light. "Cats," I said to myself as I rolled back over. Sometimes the strays dash in front of my house and set off the alarm. I was sure that was it. Movement in the kitchen. That was not a stray cat. I grabbed my glasses and stared out into the darkness towards my door. My kitchen was only a hallway away from my room, and I knew something was heading my way. I was looking for any evidence of movement under the crack of the door, a shadow moving, something. I pulled up my phone and selected the kitchen camera I had set up and again saw nothing. Nothing even looked out of place. When you're scared, any crazy idea suddenly makes sense to help chase away the fear. I assumed that the alarm system was on the fritz, probably a problem all over the country. Better check the trending topics on Twitter to see if that was the case. Movement in the... Then the power went out. I knew the camera that would have been triggered would have been the one pointing down my hallway, which meant that someone had come in through the door, through the kitchen, and was heading my way. And now, the fucking power was off. But wait, my front door was locked. How did someone get through the door? I would have heard a break-in. I would have seen it on the video. None of this made sense. Then my eyes caught a shadow moving, only it wasn't outside my room. It was in it. Then I saw another, and one more. There were 3 people in the shadows just 2 feet from the edge of my bed. I kept a bat near the side of my bed, and I slowly reached over to grab him. That's when I got the most side-splitting headache I've ever had. I clutched my forehead and tried to scream, only my voice was frozen. I couldn't talk. In fact, just like the other night, I couldn't hear anything but my heartbeat. My eyes scanned the darkness, trying to see who was in my room, trying to make sense of this shit. I couldn't focus because my head was throbbing. That's when a blue light surrounded my whole bed, and I couldn't move again. My heart was racing, but I couldn't even look away. My eyes were frozen open. The only thing I could do was stay frozen in fear and watch as a being from the opposite corner of my room lit up a red light and pointed it at me. In the red glow, I saw the faint outline of a large, almond-shaped eye on a gray, expressionless face. I heard the bees this time. They're what woke me up. I looked around and realized where I was, near the river in the grass valley. At first, I thought it was a dream, but I knew this was real when a mosquito bit me. I sat up and glanced at my watch. 3:15 in the morning. I started crying. I didn't know what else to do. I sat there for a good 10 minutes and let it all out. When I finally calmed myself down, I had to figure out how to get home. For some reason, I thought I should check out the parking lot first before heading out towards a gas station or anything that might be open at this hour. When I got to the parking lot, I gasped. My car was there. It was soaking wet like it had just driven out of a major rainstorm, but I was sure it was mine. I circled it, looking for any clues about how the hell it got here, and didn't see anything. Did I dream the abduction? Did I have some sort of super advanced form of sleepwalking, driven by extreme stress? Where I drove my car to the valley? The one place my brain knew I could relax? Was I subconsciously trying to heal my physical wounds? Those thoughts were dashed when I walked to the car's backside and noticed no tire tracks were leading to the parking lot. It was as if the car had been placed there by some benevolent god. I opened the door and saw the keys sitting in the ignition. I turned them on, and the car started right up. Without hesitating, I put it in reverse and tore ass back home. All of this leads me to tonight. It's been 3 weeks since that first encounter, and I've woken up in the field 6 times since then. Every time it's 3:15 in the morning. Every time my car is waiting for me. I'm starting to recognize when it's about to happen. It's like I've developed a sixth sense for the abductions. I'm sitting in my bed, writing this down as a way to keep calm tonight. I felt a twinge in my forehead an hour ago, usually a precursor to the event. I'm writing this down in case one morning I don't wake up in the grass valley at 3:15 in the morning, in case they decide I need to go somewhere else or sometime else, in case they decide they're finished with me. I don't know when that day will come, and what's worse, I don't know if I fear it or welcome it. Movement at the front door. And let's just move right into our last story of tonight. This one is titled, I Made a Terrible Discovery in Our Attic, and I No Longer Trust My Family. Here we go. Our lake house has always had a strange smell, an almost nauseatingly sweet odor that lingers in every corner and is impossible to ignore. When we first started coming here, it really bothered me, and I often asked my parents if we could somehow get rid of it. They told me it wasn't that bad and attributed it to the fact that the house was built over 60 years ago. It gives the house character, they said. Our guest did not agree. Over time, I guess I've gotten used to it. However, since we arrived yesterday, it had been so bad that it's almost unbearable. For this reason, I've mostly stayed in the backyard, only coming inside when it's time for dinner. Outside, it's almost completely quiet. The place has a stillness that I love, a welcoming break from the living in a major city. I often sit in the backyard for hours looking over the lake. It is said to be so deep that 80% of it has yet to be explored. This fact has always unsettled me. When I was young, my father would take me out sailing and I would avoid looking down into the water, terrified of the thought of some ancient creature popping out to greet me with its claws and sharp teeth. What made it worse was the fact that my father would make up terrifying tales of giant sea monsters and drowned people who had come back to life, looking to devour any sailor they came across. It's safe to say that he found it highly entertaining to scare the hell out of me. But that also meant he had to sit by my bed any time I had nightmares, which I imagine he found less fun. We arrived yesterday around noon after what felt like a 3-hour car ride. After we had unpacked, I decided to go for my usual walk in the woods. It had always been a tradition for me to walk this route on the first day, a way of making sure nothing had changed. I've always liked to think of it as a place lost in time. As I ventured into the woods, I quickly realized that everything looked and felt the same as it always had. This gave me comfort immediately. It had been a cloudy day, but as I kept walking, the sun began shining through the oak trees above me. About half an hour went by and I reached a big rock that marked the halfway point. I sat down and closed my eyes, thinking back to the previous year where my uncle and I had been sitting in the same spot. He had been visiting for a few days, mainly to go sailing with my father and try to convince him to renovate the house in order to get rid of the damn smell. He later told me my father had strongly opposed the idea. Neither of us understood why. I opened my eyes and realized I had dozed off for a few minutes, got up, and walked on. At the end of the road, I reached a wooden bridge that led across a small stream of water. This bridge had been there for as long as I can remember, but this time something was different. Stepping onto the bridge, I noticed that something had been written across the wooden boards below me. At first, I couldn't make out what it said, so I crouched down to take a closer look. It appeared to be a word written with white paint. Boset. B-O-S-E-T. At the time, I wasn't sure what to think of it. It definitely struck me as odd. Not so much the cryptic nature of the word, I didn't give it much thought at the time, but rather the fact that I'd never seen any kind of graffiti in these woods before. This was a completely remote area. There were no neighbors living within miles of us, and to my recollection, I'd never met any other people during my walks. In my mind, this was untouched wilderness, and I was the only one who knew about it. But now, it seemed that was no longer true. Must be kids, I thought to myself, and walked across the bridge. That evening after dinner, the three of us sat in the living room and tried to decide on something that we could all watch. I had brought a couple movies, but instead of picking one of those, my father suggested checking out the few channels that were available, a concept that seemed ancient to me. We started channel surfing, looking for something suitable for all three of us, a nearly impossible task since none of us shared any of the same interests when it came to entertainment. Eventually, we landed on an animated movie that seemed to have started playing a few minutes ago. It didn't take long for me to realize it was an adaptation of a fantasy novel I had read when I was little, a Tolkien-like tale of a young peasant boy who was picked up by a group of sorcerers to confront and defeat an ancient evil, a reptilian-looking monster that has threatened to destroy the magic world. Using his inner powers, the boy destroys the creature, rids the world of all evil forces, and saves the kingdom. Classic stuff. The movie wrapped up with victorious music and a montage of all the characters celebrating. I looked at my parents. My father was out cold and my mother was on her phone. Pretty much how every movie night ended. As the credits rolled, I felt like reading the novel again, but for nostalgia's sake, but also to see how faithful the movie actually was to the source material. I mentioned this to my mother, and to my surprise, she told me that we probably still had the novel laying around somewhere. "Check your box of old stuff. It might be in there," she told me. I didn't even know I had a box. I asked her where it was. "In the attic, on top of the other ones. It's marked with your name." As I walked up the stairs to the first floor, I was once again met with the smell that had been haunting the house since we first came here. I instantly became annoyed. If this had been a friend's or relative's house, I would have never come back. I tried to ignore it and instead focused my attention to the attic that was now right above me. I stood on my toes, extending my height just enough so that I could reach the attic panel and move it to the side. A retractable ladder revealed itself. I slowly pulled it down until it reached the floor, wiped the dust off my hands, and started climbing up the ladder. I reached the top of the stairs and carefully entered the attic, then flicked the light switch and looked around. This was the first time I'd ever been up here. To my surprise, the attic was rather large and well lit. Not at all the dark, messy room I'd always imagined it to be. That didn't mean much to me though, as the smell up here was so bad that I already wanted to leave. This would have to be a quick visit. In the far end of the attic, I saw the boxes that my mom had mentioned. They were placed neatly on top of each other, and I quickly noticed one with my name written on it. It was the one furthest in the back and seemed difficult to reach without having something to stand on. I pulled out a box that seemed heavy and climbable, got on top of it, and grabbed into the box with my name on it. I steadied myself and began lifting it. Having obviously overestimated my physical abilities, I lost my grip, dropped the box, and fell to the floor. There was a loud thud as my body hit the ground, and an even louder one when the box spilled all its contents all over me and the rest of the attic. "What happened?" I heard my mother scream from downstairs. "I dropped something," I shouted back. So much for the quick visit. I was lying on the wooden floor, looking around the room. It didn't take long for me to notice the shiny rectangular object in the corner across from me, especially since everything else that had fallen out of the box were either my old books or drawings from when I was a kid. Even though I was slightly hurt from the fall, I instantly got up and went over to find out what it was that had caught my attention. I looked down at what appeared to be a jewelry box. It didn't look like the kind you'd find in a modern store. This one was old, antique even, and covered in what appeared to be gold. The light was reflecting on its surface, making it shine brightly and giving it an almost overworldly quality, not unlike something out of the movie I'd just seen. It also highlighted a strange symbol centered on the box's surface, a half moon that had been tilted 90 degrees with two circular shapes underneath. Then I noticed the word engraved below the symbol, Melek, M-E-L-E-K. I picked it up and ran my finger over the engraved word. Even though I was disoriented from what had just occurred, I couldn't help think back to the discovery I had made in the woods earlier that day. The word written on the bridge. I tried to remember what it was, but just as I started spelling out the word in my head, I noticed something. The jewelry box was half open. I hadn't even considered looking inside it. In fact, I was going to bring the box downstairs and ask my mother when she had bought this antique artifact and why she had never shown it to us before. That never happened. Instead, I opened it. The smell hit me immediately. This time it was stronger than ever. It was still sweet, but in a different kind of way, almost like rotten fruit. I realized this was where the smell had been coming from all these years. Feeling slightly queasy, I put the open box down on the ground with the gold lid next to it. I wanted to walk away, afraid of what I was going to find inside it, but my curiosity got the best of me. I held my nose and crouched down to inspect it. Inside the jewelry box, there was a thin velvet fabric that had once been red, but now had a much darker, almost entirely black color. And on top of it were what appeared to be two rolled up pieces of meat. I started shaking as I tried to make sense of what I had discovered. Suddenly, I felt so confused and unsettled that I remember having felt like an out-of-body experience, like I was able to see myself from above, standing alone in the attic surrounded by my childhood belongings on the ground, as a reminder of my time in my life that I would never be able to get back. It felt like an overwhelming fear had been unleashed from deep within me and taken over my entire being. because I knew what I was really looking at in the golden box on the ground. I carefully tipped the jewelry box over and the 2 pieces of meat fell out onto the floor, revealing themselves to be 2 severed hands, folded into fists, completely covered in dry, black blood. The foul stench of the rot dripping off both hands made me slump down and throw up. I was shaking violently, feeling as if I had lost all control of my body and there was nothing I could do but succumb to the nausea that had been building up inside me for years. Eventually, the vomiting subsided and I laid down on the floor, completely exhausted. A couple of minutes went by as I sobbed silently, trying to look away from what was in front of me, but I couldn't, because I noticed the size of the hands. They were small and couldn't possibly be the hands of an adult person. I stopped breathing. My vision became blurry. I heard my mom shouting something from downstairs, then someone running up the first floor, then the rattling of the attic staircase. I felt a hand on my back, an embrace. Everything darkened. I woke up in my bed about an hour ago to the sound of my parents arguing in the next room. I could tell that they were trying to keep their voices down, but the heated nature of their discussion made it difficult. I sat up and looked down at myself. I was wearing nothing except for my boxers. For a moment I thought that I had dreamt the whole thing up, but then I realized I could still taste the vomit in my mouth. I was in a state of shock. I still am. The argument next door kept going. "Why would you let him go up there?" my father asked. I couldn't hear what my mother replied, since she was doing a much better job at being quiet, but based on the tone of her voice, she seemed very upset. It wasn't difficult to tell what my father was feeling. He was walking back and forth, frustrated and angry. Muttering stuff to himself, they went into another room, maybe realizing that there was a chance I could hear them, and argued some more. I heard the word irredeemable from my dad, but not much else. After a couple of minutes, the discussion died down. One of them left to go outside. I couldn't tell which one. Then there was silence. When I looked at myself in the mirror next to the bed, I noticed that I was still shaking. I thought I looked sick, unrecognizable almost. Suddenly, I heard footsteps coming toward the room. I quickly closed my eyes and pretended to go back to sleep. There was a single knock on the door. I stayed completely silent, expecting the door to open anyway. But nothing happened. I might have been fake sleeping for 10 minutes before I got the courage to get out of bed, put clothes on, sit down at my computer and write all of this down. As I'm reading it though, I realize that it sounds insane. But I know it's real. I know it happened, and I'm terrified of my family and what they might do. I have been looking up the words I found on the bridge and on the jewelry box, but have yet to figure out what they mean and if there's a connection between them. That's not going to stop me, though. Tomorrow, I'm going to sneak out and go back to that bridge in the woods. There has to be something there, something that can lead me in the right direction. If, or rather when, I bump into one of my parents, I'm going to pretend I remember nothing. But I do. I'll return soon. JHH. And that was our final story of tonight, everyone. I hope you enjoyed listening. I'll be back soon with a group of new scary stories. But in the meantime, if you'd like this video and subscribe, it would mean a lot as I'm trying to grow this channel. Once again, I am Mr. Dead Sleep, and good night.